Ronit, welcome to the Leaders Who Care series. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, with everything going on in the world, it'll be great, I think, for people to hear all the wonderful things you're doing and with your colleagues and everything. And I think it's important to hear that because it's an example for what we can all do together. So can you initially briefly introduce yourself? We'll get into all the Rozana and everything in a minute, but who's Ronit, where you from, where you are now, family, good stuff like that. Something you've never told anybody and you want to reveal to the world now.
I don't know if I'll be revealing any secrets, but I'm Ronit. I was born in Melbourne, Australia, and I moved to Tel Aviv 22 years ago. I was a law graduate with kind of optimism in my eye, and I thought that if I came here, I could try and contribute at least to the peace efforts. I grew up as a teenager within this kind of background of Oslo agreements and a lot of optimism that things would be different and that things would change, and that by the time I had kids, we wouldn't be living in war and they wouldn't have to go to the military. And yet here I am today, and that was 30 years ago. And I do have teenagers, 3. And I think not only are we not in a better place, I actually think we're in a worse place. But
you still have the sparkle in the eye.
In saying that, I'm hoping that we have hit rock bottom and that only good things can come from here, right? So there's only a way forward, a way to rehabilitate our societies and the different communities that live in our region. And that's why I'm still optimistic, because there are so many good people and so many smart people, and I am very privileged to interact with them every single day. And we're all doing our best in the peace field to try and advance something better than we have today.
So, and we definitely want to get into that. So you talked about your kids, and you have a husband also, Eli.
Yes.
Exactly.
And he's also Australian. He was brought up in the same small Jewish community that I was brought up in Melbourne. We both went to the same school. We're actually on the same school bus, but there were 6 years between us, so we didn't quite get to know each other at school. Big school, biggest Jewish school in the Southern Hemisphere. Lovely childhood, extraordinary parents, extremely privileged. I'm very, very lucky. And I think you're always going to be lucky to the parents that you're born to, so I'm very grateful to them that they instilled the values that I have and that I'm hopefully, providing for my children. And I made that decision at the age of, how old was I, 24, to move out here, and I've been here ever since.
Well, it's interesting. So what was your life as a kid or a teenager? And then you think about the lives that your kids are growing up in. What was your what were you like as a kid? Were you a mediator back then, or were you a lemonade stand entrepreneur, or what were you doing?
Not a lemonade stand entrepreneur, perhaps a mediator. I always had lots of friends. I don't know, not quite a leader, but somebody who, I did try, I think, again, from the values that I got from my parents of, just basing every interaction on respect. I think that I was able to, take a kind path through school and then at university as well. I think that's the kind of person that I was. I got good grades. I was good at school. I studied law. I enjoyed that a lot. I enjoyed the arts. I got a degree in English. I probably took leadership roles, or I was given leadership roles. So that was probably part of this life that I've led.
Well, I know. I'm going to jump in here. I know Monash University is a unique, incredible university, and I always go back to the quote. This is where cultural experiences are lived, not described. And like you said, you got your degree in law, but you also got an award for your thesis on women's legal status in Israel and Palestine, right? If I'm not mistaken. So, What were you envisioning? Sounds like you were envisioning something those
Yeah.
back then.
Well, it was. I think I was envisioning a region where there was some more leadership, women's leadership, right? So when I looked at the status of women, I advanced the idea of having a civil marriage law that would provide more rights to women um, in both Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, which today dictate the laws in the region. Again, along with the other religions that are here, and there are many. But I really kind of envisage this idea of having women's leadership to see if that would there be a difference. And this is when I did start a PhD a little bit afterwards, which I never continued, but I did start. I wanted to look at this interaction between women and peace. If there were women in power or with leadership positions that could influence the peace agreement, would it look different to the one that we saw during the Oslo Agreement, or the ones we haven't seen since then, right? And today I think there's the lowest number of women in the cabinet in Israel, at least, ever. We have seen, obviously, a woman prime minister. That was Golda Meir. That was a very long time ago. And I do believe it. And this is something I kind of look at every day. I kind of watch the news, and they show the cabinet, and they show the dialogue, and it's all these military men, and who have had a huge amount of experience. And I'm also grateful to them because I'm safe. But, I do think when looking, into the future, and into a future that could be good for the region and that would be better, I do think women's leadership is important.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we were launched on International Women's Day, our firm, actually, back in about 6 years ago. And we also believe women in business, women for peace, women. It's not that one's better than the other, but there's a different way of looking at things and handling things. And I notice also, though, that your journey in Israel has a theme basically of health diplomacy, health measures that enable communications and having a robust health system basically as a foundation. Physical health, mental health has a lot to do with people feeling good too, and maybe leading towards peace. So can you describe how you ended up getting, because of your deep-seated vision for Israelis and Palestinians, how did you get to the Perez Center for Peace, and your journey, continued from there?
Okay. So I started a PhD. My supervisor was Professor Nomi Chazan. She had been a former member for Meretz, which doesn't exist today, the Social Democrat Party. She was a staunch feminist. She is a staunch feminist. And again, that was a real privilege to be able to work with her. Once that I had some personal issues. My mother got sick. Once that didn't kind of go anywhere. Actually, it's not true. I started to work at the Perez Center during that period. But again, okay. So my mother got sick. I got pregnant. And it was very difficult to have a full-time job, be pregnant, and do the PhD. Okay, but Nomi was definitely an influence. And I started to work at the Perez Center. I was there for 5 years. I ran a department that focused on projects in the Mediterranean, mostly youth. So we brought together young people from I'd say, from about 70% of the different countries from the Mediterranean, including Jordan and Gaza at the time, and and Morocco and Tunisia, and as well France and Spain and Italy. And so it was a very interesting time in my life where I kind of got to see the late Shimon Peres's idea of a new Middle East that wasn't just about Israel and Palestine, but actually brought in the region. And I was able to not contribute, but in my small, tiny little way on these small youth projects where, and I think that this is kind of, if you talk about a theme that has gone from the beginning of my career until today, is the minute that you embrace someone, or you acknowledge them, or you have a respectful relationship with them, you humanize them, right? Somebody who was other is no longer other. they become a person. They're just not a name or a number or another person who is a terrorist or another person who is a colonialist, right? You know, you actually give somebody a face and a name and a personality, and they become human. And once somebody becomes human,
Personal, right?
it's personal. It's personal, you know, and that relationship can take, you know, so many different forms. So I think if we look at the 5 years that I had at the Paris Center, then afterwards I was a consultant.
Mhm.
I had a little business called Beyond Israel, and the team worked with a variety of different nonprofit organizations, so in women's empowerment and human rights and peace and others, you know, and we always looked at this idea of making things personal, you know, of humanizing the other, right? Whether in the women's empowerment is like humanizing women, right? Women are not just, you know, where they've always been, but they can be as well in on the front lines and in the forefront. So I think that kind of got me to where I am today. After that, after Beyond Israel, I started a startup. I got some funding. It was we collected data in the form of text, which I had editors around the world edit and then proofread, and then we use that data to create an AI engine. You know, I won't compare it to ChatGPT, but just in the small little thing that we did, it went from mailfixer.com to rephraser.com, and it just did this kind of automatic rephraser. We pointed to, we were directed at China. Most of the data had come in from China and from Taiwan, and then COVID hit, and then that kind of didn't go anywhere. But through that whole process, I had, you know, and this idea of communicating better was obviously part of this idea of democratizing communications. I had started to volunteer at Project Rozana. It just kind of felt like I needed to be in that world still. And at the time, it was Rozana was in its infancy. We didn't really have any projects in the field, but I helped establish some relationships in the region and establish the boards. And we started kind of this, you know, idea of health diplomacy kind of, you know, started to take root. So, you know, we started to understand what are the different needs across the region in terms of health. How can we address these needs? And then again, next sentence, how do we address them together where people can communicate and where they humanize one another? How does, you know, saving lives become a personal event?
So I want to jump in for a second because I want you to tell how you became the CEO, but also what I find interesting, and I find it more and more, is the thread of a person's journey. You never kind of know exactly where you're going to end up, but the building blocks and more importantly, the relationships and the learning along the way, it doesn't seem to be an accident that you got introduced to Project Rozana, and then tell us how you became the CEO there rather than just a partner or a helping them out, if you will.
Okay, so after my business hit a wall, I should say, you know, again, that was a little bit of a trauma for me because it was another little baby that I had, and it was probably my first major failure. And I, you know, obviously, but we learn from all of our failures, so it's not a failure. I know that, but it was
It's learning. It's the learning. You win and you learn. You don't win and you lose. You win and you learn.
Exactly. The chair of the organization, of the global organization, I mean, the way that the structure of the organization is that we have a regional operations team. Today, at the time, we didn't. And then we have affiliates that help us fundraise. So we had at the time, we had in Australia, Canada, and the US. And I had established the kind of the regional office, but it was just me as a volunteer. The chair said to me, you know, well, why don't you, we can see that there, you know, there's relationships that's being built, there's trust that's being created. Why don't you come out of being a volunteer and take it on it professionally and see what we can do? You know, and that was at the end of 2020. Since then, I kind of went through a period where I was more of a local person, and then I became the global CEO. But that was only after we had, had a proof of concept where we had implemented multiple projects in the field, where we'd managed to, raise some funds from organizations like USAID, not organizations, but like government organizations like USAID and FCDO, which is the British equivalent. So that was really the evolution of it, but it took I'd say the first year we spent just, you could say in a kind of, due diligence, really understanding needs. So what are the needs in the Palestinian health system? What are the needs?
What a crazy concept to try to figure out what the needs are to figure out what you need to solve. What a crazy concept. Tell a little bit about the name, the mission, and it is a global organization, but you've got some specific focus, obviously, in Israel. Can you start with that? The name, the mission.
Rozana was a little girl. Rozana was established 11 years ago. Rozana was at the time 4, so today she's 15. She was a little girl from just outside a village outside of Ramallah, not so far from Jerusalem. And she fell off the balcony off the 9th floor of her building, and her mother ended up coordinating with the Israelis to be able to get her to Hadassah, which is in Jerusalem, and her life was saved there. Our chair, Ron Finkel, who is based in Australia, he heard about this story, and he kind of looked at the 3 different aspects of, if you want to be technical about Rozana's, life-saving mission, right? So there was this coordination between the Israelis and the Palestinians in terms of the transportation. She managed to come in from the West Bank and into Jerusalem in Israel. And then she received treatment, and her life was saved. And then there was really the last question, and this is where our most of our focus is on today, is on why couldn't she go to the hospital in Ramallah? Why was it that she had to come into a hospital in Israel? And here is where we start to kind of look at what are the gaps in the Palestinian health system. And the Palestinian health system is excellent, right? But where the need is really just at the top echelons of the specializations. So I mean, so that's where we, when we looked at the training bucket, so we had this transportation, treatment, training, and that's how the organization operates. So we have today, most of our focus is on training, or peer-to-peer education, we call it today, where Israelis and Palestinians are learning from one another in areas that have been identified as gaps in the health systems. In treatment, we operate a mobile clinic in the West Bank and in Gaza, where we're providing primary care mostly to women and children. Now we've had the project in the West Bank already for 2.5 years. We go to multiple villages in the South Hebron Hills, in the very, very rural areas where there is very limited access, particularly for women, to healthcare. More recently, we've established, together with ANERA, which is the American Near East Refugee Aid, a mobile clinic in southern Gaza, which is operating in the displaced persons camp, and they're providing care to like over 300 people every day. Talk a
little bit about that. There's a lot of, not to be cute, there's a lot of leaders who care that you're surrounding yourself with, and there's tons of challenges. You got medical supplies, human capital, security. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. Talk about some of the experiences you've seen and the amazing stories, if you will.
Yeah. Look, even just yesterday, from our mobile clinic in Gaza, it's just such a difficult situation there, and resources are so limited. We got a story and some images and some video of how the physiotherapist is making do with the different things and the different resources they have. So there was like some spare plank wood, and he had one of the guys kind of using the plank wood to improve his walking. Then they found like from an old bicycle wheel, like a circle made out of the metal, and they were doing physiotherapy on a child's hand. So, there are extraordinary challenges, and you meet these amazing people that are hugely resilient, right? And just wanting to help their own people and do it, in such an optimistic way. And again, still cooperate with an organization like Rozana. It really is inspiring. On the West Bank side, the cooperation is really very much inherent in the whole operation of our mobile clinic. They work directly with Sheba Beyond. Sheba Beyond is Sheba Medical Center's virtual hospital. Sheba Medical Center is Israel's largest hospital, and they've got this amazing virtual hospital where they work directly and sometimes even in real time. If there's a particular case that needs, a response in real time, they will have the gynecologist at Sheba working with our women and our midwife and our nurse, or even our gynecologist in the field in these very, very remote villages in the West Bank.
Yeah, I remember reading Rozana views health as a human right, correct?
Well, I think it's not that it views, it just is, right? Yeah, health is a human right. Yes.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we talk about, that health is personal, and we've got to start making things more personal so that we don't just see like 1 or 2 people died today. Oh well, it's better than 20, but it is personal. And how do we make war and peace more personal? And you talked before about women, not enough women in the cabinet and whatnot. And talk a little bit about making it more personal. Talk a little bit about your journey as a woman, and the partnerships, the cultures, the judgments, the ability to thrive, but it's all the ability to come together for something more personal, which is health.
I'll tell you about one of our projects. So in the transport, I spoke a little bit now about the treatment, that we kind of in that treatment bucket, but let's say in our transportation projects, right? We've built like an ecosystem of transportation for Palestinian patients who require treatment either in one of the Palestinian hospitals in East Jerusalem or in one of the Israeli hospitals. So we have volunteers on the Palestinian side, we have volunteers on the Israeli side, and we provide also bus services. Now, this is very, very personal. We'll have a volunteer take a child and their mother, right, to the border. They will have to cross the border after receiving a permit, come into Israel, go into the car of an Israeli, right? Initially a stranger, but by the end of the trip, already not a stranger. And we have most of the patients are not just, it's not a one-off event. Most of the patients that we bring over are either going to do dialysis or chemotherapy, and that means multiple times a week. And so what we try to do is have our volunteers, particularly on the Israeli side, have the same volunteers picking up the same families, so that those relationships become very, very personal, right? And, we have got, we work with an organization that has got 200 volunteers. They rotate through and they've been seeing the same patients. Now, when a patient passes away, we had this situation a few weeks ago where we had a baby pass away who was receiving also chemotherapy and dialysis. He was only 1.5, but it was the same Israeli family that was taking him almost every single day to the East Jerusalem hospital. And then he died on a Saturday. Now the family is the volunteer is a religious woman who doesn't drive on a Saturday. In the end, we got word and we organized a driver who with a special hearse, because there are still regulations. And this is how, when you know the specific details about a child and their mother and the volunteer, this is how things become personal. These are how relationships are built, trust is built, and only through one relationship at a time can you start to have an impact. And what we it sounds maybe cliche, but these relationships have a multiplier effect.
Sure.
You do start to impact communities on both sides. And just to use the same word before, as we did before, you humanize one another, right? You become human beings to each other. On the Palestinian side, this volunteer provides free, safe, life-saving service, right? And otherwise, the only Israelis that they will meet are military, right? That is so not human. And
Right.
on the Israeli side, there's almost no interaction with Palestinians. So, and then you get, like, we're in like the period that we're living in today, where there's, a terror attack almost every other day. That is the stereotype that goes into an Israeli person's mind. But in this sense, when you create this intimate, and think about it, it's even so intimate because it's in somebody's car, you're talking even a small space, these relationships become personal and everybody becomes human.
Yeah, it's so important because in military you're taught not to be personal because you could die basically, so you don't have the time, and then so it's obviously clear that being personal is the way to peace then, and health is a way to get it there. It's so
I think health, because there is already so much ad hoc cooperation, particularly between Palestinians and Israelis. And it's just, there's also an ethical duty on a healthcare professional to save a life. There's an inherent desire already for peace and empathy. You know what I mean? So, if I talk about it from California talk, it's your lowest hanging fruit in peace, right?
Is that how Californians talk? Is
Also Tel Aviv, Tel Aviv, California.
Is that what so two people from California and Israel? Is that how they told you how we talk? It's so true. When you see, someone told me the other day, it's off the wall, but they said, I see a homeless person with a dog, and I feel so bad that I feel more sorry for the dog.
Mm.
It's a weird thing, but it's a feeling, it's an emotion and type of thing, and we need to have more of that. And I think, with all due respect to all my male viewers, I think women have to play a bigger part in that because you have a way of doing that's different. We need to have a sequel probably because there's so much more to talk about. But I do want to ask you one more question. With everything that's gone on the last 5 years, you had the 2020, the pandemic, you have war now, you got health issues. There's so many things going on in the world as usual, but it seems like there's more than ever. And now it's the end of 2024 already. Is there something you're most grateful for, even with all that? And what are you most hopeful for?
I'm most hopeful that things get better. I really do. I had a discussion with a colleague today, and we talked about the fact that we're in this war here, but I think, and here it is focused on Israel rather than the greater region with Palestine and our other neighbors. But, you're on a timeline. You have a young country that is continuously evolving. And I'm hopeful that we evolve in a way that is democratic, that is equal, that is based on respect and dignity. Again, I might be privileged because of the people that I get to interact with on a daily basis. All of my colleagues, whether they are Jewish or Muslim or Christian or Druze, and all the people that we work with across borders, like inside Israel, inside Palestine, the work that they do together, the Happy New Year and Happy Holiday messages that I get from the heads of hospitals in the West Bank, I do hope. And again, so this kind of it doesn't really cloud my judgment or anything, but this is the bubble that I live in. Mm-hmm. So you asked me what I feel grateful for. I'm grateful that I live in this bubble, but I feel hopeful that all of this goodwill, despite all of our very different lived experiences, right? And everybody's having a different lived experience today, and we're all really experiencing a lot of pain, some more than others, but there's no judgment there, right? Everybody's experiencing pain, that we're sort of all heading in this direction where we understand we're going to live with one another and we're going to try and make the best of it. And that's what I'm hopeful for.
Well, I'm grateful that you're a relatively new friend. I'm definitely grateful for that, and I'm grateful that you are a leader who cares about all this. And I think that bubble, we need to expand that bubble, that more people are under it, and so I'm super hopeful of that. Thanks for sharing and being who you are. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to have my new friend too. Thank you, Mark.
Now, no longer down under. Now you're just in it.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.